This is Drew Perkins with Collaborative for Teaching and Learning. I'm here with Jill Ackers, and we are going to talk today about a Spanish Immersion PBL elementary school that she has helped start in Dallas, Texas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dallas, Texas. It's called Spanish House. Eventually there'll be K through 5, but right now it's preschool age 2 through kindergarten. And I'm going to give Jill a few moments here to introduce herself and talk about the school in general and just some things about it. So go ahead, Jill.
Hi. At the Spanish House we serve, our population is ages 2 through kindergarten. So we have a full project-based learning program in our early childhood, our preschool, as well as our elementary. Our elementary is currently an integrated or partially integrated model for PBL, which will eventually move to a fully integrated model. And then our preschool is a fully integrated project-based learning model. Our preschool is 100% Spanish immersion, and so the majority of our students are 75% of our students are native English speakers, and 25% of our students come from a mixed home, Spanish and English, or all Spanish background. And then in our elementary school, we are a dual language program. So in our kindergarten, we do all of our coursework, 90% of our coursework is in Spanish, and 10% of our coursework is in English. So currently all of our project-based learning work is done in Spanish, and our students receive 10% of English language arts. That way we're growing their early literacy and their pre-reading skills in both languages rather than just one language. And every year as we add grade levels up to 5th grade, we'll increase the English language by 10% until we're at a 50-50 dual language model.
Interesting. So if you would, I had no idea it was 75% English speakers. That's an interesting mix, and I'd like to explore that in a minute. But if you would kind of talk about your impetus behind getting involved in this and getting it started, and why you thought PBL was the way, and Spanish immersion was such an important part.
So my daughter went to a Spanish immersion preschool that was being a dual language speaker is relevant in our family. We have Spanish-speaking family members who do not speak English. So our daughter being able to communicate with her family members was very important to us. And then when it came time for our daughter to move into a kindergarten environment from preschool, we researched the schools in our areas, and my husband and I were very interested not only in the dual language, but really critical thinking, inquiry-based learning, project-based learning was our goal for our daughter's education, and so that critical thinking element is really important to us. And so we looked around in our neighborhood, both at the private schools as well as the public schools, and we found one dual language program, but it did not utilize an inquiry-based program. And so and then we couldn't find a project-based learning program in our area for elementary school that really truly focused on all the elements, so to speak, of project-based learning. And so I partnered with my daughter's preschool. I sat the owners down and said, I think that there's a need in our community for a project-based learning school as well as a dual language school that really sets our students up for that oral language development. And so we spent a year researching dual language schools in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area, as well as we did research in Canadian schools on their French and English programs to really look at how we develop students' oral language and reading abilities in both languages. And then we spent a year really planning what the design of the elementary school would look like based on structures, processes, what it means to take teachers through the process of becoming a project-based learning teacher, and creating what we have at our school is a 3-year process to become what we would consider, a novice PBL teacher is really a 3-year process. And so any teacher that we hire comes in as a teacher's assistant, and they have to learn that PBL process. They have to learn about the oral language production process. So we do that for a year, and we train those teachers before they can actually become a teacher in a classroom. And so that's for our preschool as well as our elementary school. And then we set it up. Our class sizes are between 12 students and 14 students, and we have 2 teachers in every classroom, because we felt part of really delivering an authentic learning experience for our students was developing an individualized learning program. And so with having 2 teachers in the room really gives us the ability to bring in speakers, work with students based on where they are within a project to move them forward at their own level, yet still pushing them out of their comfort zone so they're gaining new content mastery, the 21st century skills, and those pieces. So that's a great overview there. So and I think it's a really important point that you make about making the teacher training 3 years, and then at that point you're still just a novice PBL teacher is really an important one, because the nature of schools and a lot of the training is, quick workshop, let's see where it goes from there. And PBL, just like anything else, but maybe PBL, because it's such a big paradigm shift, is really something that does take a tremendous amount of time, something that we believe in here, and that limits some opportunities for training, because schools want to do just a short bit. But so if we could talk about that 3 years, if you would, what does that look like? Sort of is there a workshop that kicks everything off, and then obviously the embedded work? What does that look like for those teachers over that, like let's say over a year? What kind of work do they do? Sure. So the first year really is it's a 3-day introductory project-based learning workshop, and then they focus on the next 2 days. So we spend 5 days really on that first workshop, and the second 2 days is really spent on unpacking standards and how to link inquiry-based thinking to each one of the standards that will be embedded into their projects. So they'll design a project that first 3 days, and then we'll really spend the next 2 days on what inquiry-based tasks help lead to a higher quality product, even in the preschool classroom, even in a 2-year-old classroom. How do you really embed inquiry on a daily basis as it helps students lead towards a final product? So for example, our first unit this year for our teachers, we were doing the basic elements of shape. And because ultimately in preschool, in a 2-year-old room, you're working on fine motor skills. In a 3-year-old room, it's really how do I grab a pencil, and then they start writing letters and things like that. And so instead of our teachers coming from the background of, well, you give them a worksheet and they trace a letter, is really not our philosophy. Our philosophy is no worksheets. It's all, everything you're doing has purpose. And so the students they worked on the basic elements of shape. And so because the basic elements of shape, there are 5 of them, all of those basic elements lead up to all of the strokes that make up every letter in the alphabet. And so our students then, we brought in artists. We did Skype sessions with artists. And so the students were able to choose a piece of art based on the various artists that we placed around the school. And so it was really, that first unit was very structured. So I planned the unit. I wrote out the inquiry pieces that they were using, and then I spent time in every teacher's classroom just pointing out where students were using inquiry. And so really that first year is based on, here's a unit plan that you're designing, where are the elements of inquiry and where do they fit in? And how do we spark that with a driving question? So we really spend that first year on that.
So you had mentioned partially integrated. Was the partially integrated at the preschool, you said?
At the elementary school.
At the elementary. Okay. So is that because of the teacher capacity to have PBL sort of wall to wall?
Yep. So in our preschool, it's 100% integrated. They can do it almost, in a sense, like a thematic. Everything can connect. But in the elementary school, it was our elementary teacher's first year to teach kindergarten.
Right.
So to learn PBL, to understand the Texas state standards, the next gen science standards, how to teach, truly teach in a dual language environment, I chose going with a partially integrated model. That way I could help. So I have actually written all of their PBL plans alongside her. So we really work as a team to develop those. And then she can really understand what it means to embed inquiry into the science and social studies curriculum, because I didn't want her to feel like science and social studies would go by the wayside and she would focus on the reading and the listening and the speaking and the math. So we've partially integrated it to allow her to build her skill set around designing PBL instruction. And then next year she'll go into a fully integrated model.
Okay, great. You know, one of the things we talked about, I think, before we went live here was that element of play, and I have a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old. I know you have little ones, and the importance of play and inquiry and how that really plays out in little kids. I mean, where people think about the terrible twos and kids always asking why, right? And so I love that idea of sort of leveraging that and really not losing that a lot of times we end up losing in sort of traditional instruction. And so can you talk a little bit about that inquiry and play, how that looks in elementary and preschool as in a PBL type setting?
So in our preschool, as we think about play, our students in the preschool go through at least a 60-minute extended play period based on their project every day. So they're given artifacts and tools and materials that they can start to work on and design products that help them answer this question that's been posed in their classroom. And so going back to that art piece, it was how can you create a piece of art to curate our school. And so every student designed a piece of art that was going to be hung up in the school for a period of 3 months. And so we then took the kids into the different areas where they would be hanging their art, and they were pretended and they dressed up as museum curators. And then we let them have paintbrushes and extended play and turned the school into, one day we turned the school into a giant canvas. And then, so we had paper everywhere, and they were just painting, and then we would talk about the different elements of shape. As the kids were painting, the teachers would almost like leave little breadcrumbs for the students to really build their thought, oh, I want to learn more about that. And then they could go to that room where they were working on that element of shape. And so really the teachers set the stage for what that inquiry piece will look like. And so placing materials that students can play with, but then the key element all the way up into kindergarten is giving them the extended period for that playtime, because it takes students 15 to 20 minutes to really go into the role during that play and start to use the language, that academic content vocabulary that you want them to start using. And if we cut that play off too early, we lose that academic content. And so we're finding that in the elementary class as well, where, you know, in most kindergarten classes you don't have that extended period of play. And so we've connected based on our schedule, 30 minutes of project time and then 30 minutes of centers, which is really our extended play. And if we have students who need a little bit of extra work, we don't touch that centers time. That's truly a sacred time where they can go through that dramatic play, and they go in and out of centers that are inquiry-based, hands-on centers that are related to their projects. And so we have found academic success and oral language development in our students because we really provide that extended 60 minutes of play or inquiry-based exploration. Did that answer your question, I think?
Yeah. And you know, I love that idea of breadcrumbs, and I think what you're getting at there, and correct me if I'm wrong, is sort of that cycle of inquiry, right? So presenting that new thinking and then allowing them to ask those questions and helping them with the little ones especially, and even in older ages, you have to help and coach and support them as they as they often don't know how to ask those questions at those older ages. But I love that idea of breadcrumbs. So, but there's one thing that jumped out at me, and I think is an important thing to address, because sometimes critics of PBL and hearing the language of like this playtime is sacred, we don't interrupt that, in the high stakes and structured traditional school setting. That I think probably could come off as sound a little hippy dippy, if you will. And we know that content and skills are very important, for a number of reasons. Content is important, testing, or however that plays out. But can you talk about sort of that balance between allowing for that play and really how that connects to content in a way that's really meaningful and, like you said, purposeful? And so how the planning connects to that sort of free form, allowing kids to think a little bit, but making sure that content is still being taught.
So part of our unit planning process, we employ what we call the double planning strategy that Doug Lemov in his book Teach Like a Champion wrote about, and where our teachers within their plans, they plan Socratic questioning questions to ask their students. And so our teachers are constantly, in a non-invasive way, moving in and out of their extended play periods to support that academic development around where they are within their thinking. And so all of the inquiry-based tools during that playtime are relevant to where the students are within product development within their project. And our teachers are specifically designing Socratic questioning during each phase of the project to ensure that students are connecting that inquiry base to the standards that they're working on. Because even in preschool, we have math, science, early literacy standards, social and emotional development standards that our teachers are basing their plans on students mastering those standards in a developmental way. And so they have to become, and that's really what the second year of a PBL teacher in our environment focuses on. How do I start Socratic questioning to ensure that my students are able to demonstrate what they know and what they can do with that knowledge during that extended period of play, or during circle time, or during a writing time. And so that is really our whole second year has been based on, and that's where we are right now, is in our second year. And so we have focused it solely on deepening our ability around questioning. How do I use thinking maps with only questions all day long? And how do I get students to really build and generate their ability to create questions and ask deeper questions of each other? And so, and part of that for teachers has been allowing, it's a mind shift, a mindset change for them, because they have to allow their students to really cooperatively collaborate. Instead of, I'm going to let my kids talk at the table, I've spent the year training teachers, if you want to ask better questions and you want your students to ask better questions, we have to train them on how to collaborate together and what it means to cooperate. And that's part of, at the early ages, teaching kids how to mitigate their emotions, how to use their words, how to effectively ask for what they want and really mean what they want. And are they sure? And so that's really using the inquiry-based process to help kids become better critical thinkers. And so I meet with every teacher in the school, and we look at what their day is going to be. We do this once a week. And we talk about the questions that they're going to ask their students. We talk about how we connect their work back to the driving question using deeper questioning. Are you asking accuracy questions? Are you asking depth or breadth questions here? Are you really focusing on a fairness or a significant content piece? So really getting our teachers, even during preschool, to think of themselves as true instructional designers instead of, I'm just going to be, you know, making sure they can hold a pencil right. But they're really building their sense of critical thinking and questioning.
Yeah, I mean, so the Socratic seminar style, even in a non-PBL setting, is such a great tool.
Mhm.
But that idea conceptually of leading through questioning is a sort of a shift, not sort of a shift. It's a real shift, like you said, for teachers. And so you really have to be, I think, deep into that content. I like how you thought about really connecting those questions ahead of time for the teachers going into it, because to me I think there's sort of almost like a Venn diagram of sort of the art and the science of teaching. The science being sort of how do you design, put it on paper and structure things in a way that would facilitate great learning, but then that art of applying it, and like you said,
Mhm.
so as it's going on, you've got kids playing, or in a middle or high school setting or even college setting, as you're coming around and working with kids and groups, how do you ask the right questions? And to
Mhm.
me, really, that is an art of timing and preparation. Of the science of preparation can certainly, I really like how you've made that connection there.
And it's
So,
really deepened our teachers' understanding of the flow of a project
mm,
and really allowed teachers to let go of I have to get them to answer the driving question right away.
right.
Because they're not really creating guiding questions or enduring questions. They're really breaking down that project into meaningful tasks and using that questioning to reinforce the content behind it. So absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the structure of a project. To me, I think thinking of it in a calendar sense, whether it's elementary, middle, or high, thinking about on what day, on any given day, as a teacher, what am I going to do to deliver that instruction, the things that they need to know, and really referring back to that inquiry list. But then, what are we going to have students do as a formative assessment to show that they're getting it, and that my scaffolding has worked? So at that elementary level, in a Spanish immersion, the way that you're doing things, are the formative assessments, do they look any different, or what are maybe some samples, some ideas of formative assessments that you're using, that your teachers are using?
We use a lot of thinking maps right now as our students are learning how to read. Right now, all of our students are reading in both Spanish and English now, and so they're able to write and articulate their thoughts in words, but we use a lot of thinking maps so students can make their thinking visual and then be able to explain it orally. So we usually do a twofold formative assessment on a daily basis all day long. And then I took our kindergarten teachers through an ethnography study, so not necessarily action research, but really teaching our elementary teachers, when you're working through this PBL project, truly studying the actions of your students. When do you know if you're making the correct high inference judgment based on their low inference actions? So we started by just having the teachers take anecdotal records, but just using low inference notes. And that in itself took almost 6 weeks. Get teachers to just observe kids for what they were truly doing and not placing judgments around the actions that were happening. And so once they could truly start to take low inference notes, they could really see where each student was within the content that they were, math or science or social studies content that they're trying to uncover. They could really learn to plan their questions, plan their formative assessments based on student actions. So after that formative assessment, they can make those high inference judgments because they had evidence. They could look at what was actually happening with the student, write those actions down, look at those actions as they relate to mastering that standard that they're focused on, then make that high inference call and really come back and provide either spiral back to reteach something if a student missed it, or the ways in which they would shape their next piece of learning for that student.
So when you're talking high inference and low inference, I'm not sure everybody is comfortable with that language.
Sure.
Can you explain that a little bit, just so everybody is on the same page?
So low inference notes meaning Drew is sitting in his chair. Drew is nodding his head. Not Drew sitting comfortably in his chair and looks happy. because I'm making a judgment. I don't really know if you're comfortable, and I don't really know if you're happy. And so then based on, I'm going to take that low inference note piece of evidence or information, I'm going to look at the work that was supposed to come out of that time period, and then I'm going to make a judgment, a high inference judgment on, did Drew really master content at that point, or did he really work with and apply the content at that point based on that formative assessment?
Interesting.
That helps?
Yeah, it's almost, it reminds me of an old psychology teacher of the fundamental attribution theory, and really making some judgments based on some assumptions or actual fact and high and low, that kind of thing. So one of the things that I think is a struggle for all PBL teachers, especially beginning, is authentic audience, and I don't think it's any easier. Matter of fact, it may be more difficult for elementary teachers to sort of grasp that because of the sophistication of thinking of the elementary kids versus maybe high school students who can, do some almost adult-like work. And one of the things that I sometimes suggest to teachers as they come up with project ideas is to think about the content and think about how adults use it. But that's a bit of a stretch sometimes for elementary. So what, as far as authentic audiences and authentic, meaningful, real work, what are some of the sort of the tricks and things that you all do, or how do you get at authenticity at that level, maybe?
Sure. So I'll start with one of our projects. Our kindergarten students, they built Rube Goldberg machines based on the AP 50 Harvard Rube Goldberg example, and so our students were actually given a clear marble that had a bug in it, and their driving question was, how do you engineer the bug so it can move across the room, or something like that. I can't remember what the exact question was. And so they were then led into a room that had straws, bowls, Legos, boxes. It looked like a giant trash pit if anyone was to come in, but it was actually engineering materials. And so they had to build a Rube Goldberg machine to move that ball from one place to another. And so our authentic audience was, we had at the end was a panel of parents. It was also a panel of new parents coming into the school. We're going to test out those Rube Goldberg machines. And then we brought in SMU engineering students through the middle of the project. So not to talk about engineering, but what they did was they helped the students decide how many times they were going to fail in their project before they got the machines right. And so we were working on the next-gen science standards and the force and the motion. And so those guys came in through the middle to say, just to talk about, your projects might fail how many times. They did a probability on that. And then they talked to the students about force and motion. So they reinforced what they were doing. And so at the end, the students had to plan their presentations. And within their presentations, they had to talk about how they used the advice from the students from SMU to really improve their products, and then talk about, did they really fail as many times as they thought they were going to fail. And so we bring public audience all the way through, not just at the end, and then we reinforce it now with almost 2 authentic audiences. So we try and always use our parents. We're still preschool through kinder, so our parents are very active and wanting to see their projects, and so there's always a parent element at the end. But we try to really bring in audience members that are connected to the content of the project. So our students we had donated a bunch of Hot Wheels, and so our community unit, students had to create communities for these Hot Wheel cars. So they had to have streets, and they had to have, fire stations and things like that. What would go in their local community? So we brought in police officers to give feedback on their designs that they did, their draft work on paper. We brought in the mayor. For 5 minutes, the mayor came in, and the students could ask questions. And so, we had like 3 students who were able to ask questions because we were happy to get 5 minutes on his agenda. So. We brought in firemen. We brought in, roles that were relevant so our students could really think about, well, this is what happens in the real world, not just the adult world, but the world that they're a part of. And I think one thing that we have found over the last 2 years is that it doesn't necessarily for a young child have to be part of the adult world, it just has to be part of their real world. And that becomes relevant because it's present and it's personal to them. And so we haven't mastered the why of our projects. That's our 3rd year, is having our students really understand why they're creating products. That's that 3rd year of training. So this sort of relevant piece around inquiry has a lot to do with authentic audience, because they also drive that inquiry piece. And so for us, it's been a shift of authentic audience not necessarily being the ultimate at the end, even though all of our students have to present in some way publicly at the end. We use each other's classrooms right now and parents a lot, but we bring in that connection to the real world throughout the middle of the project.
Yeah, I often think, and even with my 6-year-old who doesn't do PBL explicitly, although we're working on that right now with her 1st grade teacher, you know, I think you can more easily get away with, if you will, and I don't like to say that in a way like we're cheating them, but you know, younger kids, a simulation of a sort, they are more apt to buy into it as you get older, middle school and high school. They may know that you know, if I come in, that I'm not really the mayor, although we don't want to trick kids necessarily, but they're more compliant. We definitely want to try to get away from that compliance and get into engagement and as far away and more authentic as the most authentic, purposeful work that we can. But for, like you said, for little kids, what is real to them is very authentic. So leveraging that, absolutely. And so thinking about then engagement, because another problem that often happens with PBL is the teachers plan things and you say, boy, the kids will love this, and they don't, and then you know, they might be upset, say, you know, these kids, what's wrong with them? They don't find this interesting. That's their fault, right? But what kind of things, you know, again, with elementary and preschool kids, you're probably it's not as hard to find things because they're such pleasers at that age. How do you sort of navigate that landscape of engagement without having them just be people pleasers and teacher pleasers and teacher's pet kind of thing? What kind of things do you do to try to identify things that are necessarily interesting to them and might get at their empathy or problem solving?
Bring up a really valid point is engagement. And when I do workshops and I work with, you know, pre-K all the way up to the university level, I have actually moved away from the word engagement, and I've moved a lot towards empowerment. I feel like engagement prompts folks to want to be Johnny Carson on the stage and make sure that kids feel entertained. And as an educator, my role is to make sure that you're empowered to want to understand why that piece of content is relevant to the way the world functions. And so for me, empowerment around content helps to engage students into the reasoning why it's connected to them personally. And so I agree with you. At a younger age, it's easier to engage students and empower them because their ability and their excitement around learning is very different. And so, not very different, but they're at a younger phase in their educational career. And so, but as we get older, I think if we change the tone around engagement and really empower kids to find out what that need to know is through really powerful work, we end up with students who are engaged. And I attribute that to Paula Rutherford, who wrote the 21st Century Mentor, and she talks about the most well-managed classroom is one that has the best planned instruction. And when you really plan your instruction around empowerment and authentic reasoning behind the reason why content can be important, students become engaged. And that is the art of teaching and the art of loving what you do. And so I think for teachers who struggle, it's it's new because maybe they didn't experience that kind of empowering engagement in their own classroom, and so they're unsure of how to embed that in sort of work into their own plans, and so that becomes a challenge for folks like me and you who really work with teachers to get them to see beyond the entertainment factor and the excitement, but really the empowerment of why that content knowledge is relevant.
Yeah, how often do we hear teachers or educators think about activities and hands-on, experiential, PBL being that being lumped in there sometimes, and they say, boy, we need to make learning fun for the kids, and I think that's a really dangerous thing to pursue, first of all, because it's not possible all the time, and then if it's not fun, then what, right? So maybe interesting or kind of engaging, empowering, like you say, so that it's not necessarily, it can be fun, and fun is not a bad thing at all. It's a great thing, but when we cognitively and intellectually engage, as well as emotionally engage, I think, with the brain, I think then it's almost like it is fun, but it's not fun in sort of a circus games kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that distinction is, I think, a really important one. So how would, as you all have gone about planning this school, is the physical layout different, or if it is, then how is it different and why? And if it's not, was there any reason behind that other than just sort of the parameters that you were working within?
Great question. I don't think we necessarily have a very innovative space. We have, downstairs we have 12 rooms that are rectangular shaped. They all have a door that opens to the playground, and but there's not, innovative chairs. Our furniture is from IKEA, and our elementary school rooms are square. We are focused on really capturing how technology can be a transparent tool for our kids next year. That's been a focus for us. But we don't have innovative spaces. And, I've seen some really amazing innovative materials as far as furniture and carts and different seating systems that you can put into a room. But I think your space is only as creative and innovative as the people that you put in them. And so, which makes our ability to choose the right teachers for our school our leverage point. So for us, IKEA furniture and square and rectangular rooms will be okay, because we know the people we place in those rooms are not going to look at them as squares and rectangles.
Yeah, and it's funny, I can imagine pulling in some engineers again to put together IKEA furniture, right?
Right, no kidding.
I think it's, I think you make a very good point, and your point about technology, and I don't know, it sounds like you're moving towards more of that. I know we both, talk about in workshops when we work with teachers, is that technology is not one of those skills that we that is necessary in PBL. But have you all identified some things that some tools, some technology apps or tools that you have found to be really successful in the PBL setting with elementary, or are you still sort of on that journey?
We're definitely on that journey. So we started this year as a BYOD environment, and we're actually going to shift to where we provide a layer of our own so we can support those apps and really make sure that all the kids can download all the apps that we want to work with. So that really is a beginning point for us, and so we're really focusing on the writing apps and the researching apps, some of the drawing, we have kid picks and things like that. Mm-hmm. We use an online reading program called Raz Kids, where the students can use their iPads at school and at home to read their books, and then it monitors their reading. It helps with their leveled and guided reading program. But that's really our next adventure, so I can't really give you a ton of things that we're using right now, and so and we don't really use them in the preschool yet. We're not there. We're focused in for them on that real project-based and inquiry-based piece, because we know those preschoolers are going to get that technology as they get older. And so really we're focused on that inquiry and play around their project for them.
Yeah, and again, I think it's really important to emphasize that technology is not necessary, nor is it necessary to have a hugely innovative space. All of those things certainly can help, and as you're going on that journey and thinking about how you want to implement it and integrate it next year, the things that drive it are things like you said, you know, how do we, what will help us research, what will help us create, because that Socratic method, that inquiry, and
I lost you.
and so all of your technology, I think, really, for me, should be geared towards how do we best do that in a collaborative environment. So, absolutely. So, as we think about, as we wrap up here, I don't want to keep you forever on a Friday afternoon here, but as you all started this journey and are in this journey, are there some things that you look back on? I'm sure there are, right? You think, boy, we should have done that, or could have done that differently or better, or wish we had done that. And then what are maybe some of the things that you thought, man, that was one of the best things we've ever done, or maybe you know, tips or tricks for schools and administrators that might be thinking about making that change from a traditional setting? So there's 3 questions there, right?
Sure, I'm with you. I'm picking up what you're putting down. You know, I think as we look back over the last 2 years, making sure that our vision was clear for our teachers first. You know, we had a vision statement written, and we talked about it, but we talked about it as a group, but we didn't really spend enough time revisiting that vision over and over. So we got lost in the technical piece of designing PBL, but really, what is PBL doing for our students? And so really making sure that there was a strong connection there. And so we really embedded that into our work at the beginning of the school year this year, is what does PBL do for our students? And we put students at the center rather than PBL at the center. Whereas the first year we put PBL at the center. This is the new initiative that everyone's going to take hold, you know, but instead of really what is the outcome, what does it do for our students? And then I'd say one of our successes as a school leader is I have the ability to go in and talk to every teacher almost daily. And so we do walkthroughs. We do the 10-minute walkthrough. We do the observation and feedback. We do the teacher evaluations. But I have found what really has helped my teachers grow is I know what projects they're doing, and I can check in with that particular project and their product. And I think personalizing the work for teachers and feeling supported by their school leader who gets what they're doing, in the sense that I know what PBL is. I know that it's okay if you're going to struggle, and I want you to take a risk and fail, because I know your students are going to come out better for that because you're teaching them critical thinking and problem solving. And so I think as a school leader, how do we take the structures and processes to really support teachers without having to abandon all of your other responsibilities and duties? And so I have some pretty sacred time on my calendar that is just set aside for 2-minute walkthroughs and check-ins with my teachers. And I'm very grateful to Paul Bambrick, who wrote Driven by Data and Leveraging Leaders, to teach me how to take observation and feedback and make it informal, not just formal. So, you know, we don't do Driven by Data. We're not there yet, or we're not there. But really understanding that if you're going to use data to drive relevant learning for students, you have to build relationships with teachers, and you have to understand what they're working on. And so that's our number one priority, and it's, I think, the reason why our teachers have been successful, because we're writing this together, not as school leader versus teacher. And in order to change it from an us to a them playing field, to level that out, it's me being on that playing field with them.
Yeah, I think that's, and well, before I follow up, is that more a function of your size, or is it more a function of sort of the structures that you're using, or both?
So I really pulled these structures when I was the K-12 administrator in a school of 1,200, and I had 75 teachers to manage and provide and build relationships with. So I pulled that from my large school experience and working with other a group of 5 administrators in one K through 12 setting. And so I think, although we're fortunate enough to be in a small size, I can say from experience that it's possible to do it in a large school as well. So it just takes us understanding what the high impact pieces are that are really going to help students and teachers.
Right, and you know, I think your point about the vision statement. You know, how many times do we have schools or organizations, ourselves included here at CTO, we have vision and mission statements, but how often do we reflect on those? And really, almost as a microcosm of, microcosm of a classroom, right? I mean, you want to think about your vision almost as a driving question, and then think about how that rolls out, and putting the student at the center there, absolutely, because you can really lose your way. I think Sir Ken Robinson, in one of his many videos, made it, you know, abundantly clear. He's just so eloquent about it. But you know, you have all of the other things as educators, administrators, that often get in the way of what really matters, and that's teaching and learning. And if the teaching and learning is not of high quality, then the rest of the stuff won't matter. And it's so easy to get lost in those things. So one of the things that I think is worth exploring and talking about is you're in Texas, which is not a Common Core state. You have the TEKS for public schools. You're a private school. And as we talked before we went live about standards-based grading, I think that's in Kentucky here. That's one of the pushes that we're making, competency-based, standards-based grading. And so, would you mind talking a bit about, first of all, how you integrate standards and the TEKS, which are the Texas
Essential Knowledge and Skills.
Right, and so that's sort of their version of
Common Core.
Yeah, kind of Common Core. They're different, certainly, so how do you include those, or how closely aligned are you with those, and what does that standards-based grading look like for you all and for your kids and teachers, and what was the reason for going with that approach?
Sure. So the first thing we decided was that the Texas state standards and the Common Core standards are the baseline for our curriculum program, because we have to prepare students in our preschool to go into any elementary school, into our city or in any other state, and so as well as in our elementary school. So if we have parents who decide they really want this dual language for their K-1 to years, they still have to be equally as prepared to go into any other school, any private system or public system anywhere in the country. So the first thing that I sat down and did was I mapped and aligned the Common Core state standards with the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills so I could find the connections between those two. And then we created a scope and sequence based on both sets of standards, so that way we can ensure that our students can demonstrate mastery around both sets of standards to make sure that they were successful. So within that, we follow a standards-based grading process. So every 6 weeks our students receive report cards, and those report cards are based on all of those standards, and the students are graded accordingly around mastery, proficiency, satisfactory, and then every student's graded on those standards individually. And so standards-based learning is really at the heart of our program, because we need to make sure our students are not only critical thinkers, problem solvers who have the ability to learn through an inquiry-based program, but they still have to remain relevant to if I go into a public school and I have to take my third grade standardized test, I still need to make sure that we have all of those skills. I still need to make sure that they're learning what they need to developmentally. So we definitely use that, and we align our grading system with that. And so every student receives a standards-based grade report card for each content area.
So they're not like on a 100% scale or a letter grade scale, or do you sort of combine all of those eventually into a letter grade, or is it more of a narrative?
Right now it's more of a narrative for the kindergarten program, and when they move into the first grade it becomes more of a numerical scale, so that way if they transfer into a different program we can align their reports. And so we'll do it on a 1 to 4 level, so you can still transfer that into a full 100% scale if you needed to. And so, but right now it's just purely, it's anecdotal. It's all, records, how they're doing, the evidence that goes to show, and they map those pieces for parents.
Mm-hmm. And does, with your clientele, so the demographics, it might be a little bit easier, but I'm wondering does that look different in a parent-teacher conference? Are the parents and the students playing any different types of roles in those typical parent-teacher conferences?
I don't think our parent-teacher conferences are different. I think they are very typical, and so our parents come in, they receive their report card via email, so that way they can review the standards first, and then we ask our parents to generate questions, because that's really what our focus is that generating of questions, to actually sit down with their students and ask their students those questions. And then when they come to that parent-teacher conference, our teachers generate a set of questions for their parents, and then the parents hopefully bring a set of questions as well. But if not, we really focus on where they are on those standards during that conference meeting.
Interesting.
I have to admit, I was the parent who forgot to generate her questions when I showed up for the conference. I was like, oh my God, I forgot to do it.
Well, I would say that that's maybe a little different from most parent-teacher conferences, and that's an interesting concept. I really, when I taught in California, I taught middle school in teams, and this is not atypical, but we would have, sort of meetings. All the parents had to come in and have a meeting and really talk about the work that they had done, and I really loved that, as opposed to sort of scheduled parent-teacher conference, and more typical, especially in high school, and a lot of times parents are less engaged at that level as well. But having parents generate questions and teachers generate questions, especially as a modeling for the questioning that we want kids to do in PBL, I think is a really great way to approach that. So one other thing here before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about management. It's something that sort of seems to come almost as an afterthought with PBL teachers as they start the journey.
I've lost you. I know. There you go.
Am I here?
There you go.
Okay. I have no idea why it does that. So I was going to say, before we wrap up here, I wanted to talk a little bit about management, and as we train and think about working with teachers, and I don't like that word train, but get teachers the capacity to work around PBL effectively, we often start with design and follow that with assessment because it's so closely tied. One of the things that teachers often come to sort of later in the journey quite often is the management, and really struggle with some of the management structures that make group work and cooperative collaboration effective, and also struggle with group and individual accountability. So are there some things that you all do to, how do you sort of handle that group and individual accountability, especially at such a young age? Mm-hmm. And what are some of the management things that you work with on your teachers?
So the first thing we did is we changed the word management to really just culture. And in order to foster a PBL culture, our teachers needed facilitative leadership training. And so I've embedded facilitative leadership training all the way through all of their training. And then we meet once a month as a team, so all of the 4-year-old teachers and I will meet, and we actually focus on what strategies they're using to support that cooperative learning environment in their classroom, because that's in preschool, their leverage point is building oral language development in their kids, and that doesn't happen unless they're talking to each other. And so our management, our culture has to be very tight, and just by proxy of my experience, that's always been at the forefront of all of our training, and starting with some facilitative leadership courses, Kagan strategy training, and how do I use that to build capacity around students talking to each other. And so we use a lot of tools, even with our 4 and 5-year-olds, even with some of our 3-year-olds, not our 2-year-olds, they're not quite there, but we use things like start, stop, and continue, more, less, and continue. What do you want me to do more of? What do you want me to do less of? What do you want me to continue doing? So we're building reflective pieces around management that our teachers can use to have kids manage each other. I would recommend that for K through 12. I recommend it for adults. And so we teach our students how to brainstorm. You know, part of that initial inquiry process is brainstorming. And so we give them strategies on how to facilitate that. So they'll use things like the open, narrow, close. So we're training our kids how to cooperatively collaborate together, and that changes the style of management in your classroom because they start to build a culture around that cooperation. But it's about us as school leaders and teachers being intentional on how you set the stage for management in your classroom. And so advice being, how do you weave all the way from day one and balance formative assessment not only for the individual but for the team? And I think that starts with making the team the priority on the first day.
And do you get any pushback, or how do you deal with that pushback of when it comes to scoring and grading and the sort of that elephant in the room, right? The balance between how much of, you know, I don't want my daughter to be dragged down by the others in the group, nor do I want my daughter to, if she's the high flyer, to you know, teach the others,
right.
Or if my daughter's the low flyer, to be left behind and not feel like they can participate, those kinds of things.
And so, you know, traditional strategies around just, you know, personality styles, building roles that are relevant to the project, and understanding that every student understands their job description. So, you know, we have in our kindergarten group, our teachers write our students' job descriptions first, and then they craft questions that they're going to pose to the students, and the students ultimately write their job description. Because what I have found over my years of doing it is if you don't understand your purpose within the project, you can never truly answer the question of the project because you were never sound at first with where you were. Mm-hmm. And so really spending time at the beginning to ensure that students understand their job description and role, and that every student has to be a researcher. They have to build that initial schema around the content of the project before they can move into working together, drawing conclusions, breaking apart assumptions as they make inferences around the research that they do. And so really giving everyone the opportunity to research, and then for management, so you let students go out and research, and then they come back and they use something like an I know, you know activity. And so by proxy of letting them do that individual work and coming back into a group. So they go out and do individual work, come back as a group, and then have a metacognitive wrapper that pulls their thinking together, has really changed the management dynamics. And so as a teacher, how do I facilitate that within my classroom? And really, and from my days at being a teacher at KIPP schools, where we had to, you know, craft daily agendas by the minute, I've really taken that into my PBL experience to ensure that students have that individual versus group versus metacognitive work as timed in agenda pieces within that time frame of the class period. And so teaching teachers how to manage their time teaches them how to facilitate where management doesn't become the biggest issue because they're engaged and empowered by the content.
Yeah, and I think, the management, again, modeling that management that we want with kids as administrators or workshop leaders, or really flattening that out. I was talking with a principal just the other day, and talking about having lesson plans posted outside the door, or having binders and things like that. And I think the collaborative environment that you create with PBL, with the kids and with the students when it's really working right, does away with the need for those things to be posted and sort of checklist ideas, because it does become about qualitative language as opposed to quantitative. And I love that idea of purpose. When I talk with teachers, one of the things that kind of going back out from purpose of the role, but purpose that the authentic audience can provide. And so thinking about your driving or compelling question, so what is our task, but then what is our purpose? Why are we doing that? Which sometimes gets left off. So I always encourage teachers to think about, what are we doing? What's our task? And then so what's our purpose? Then if you want to distill it down and make it a little more kid-friendly, especially for younger kids, that's as a teacher what you need to pull out and what you need to coach out. And again, as you said, sort of being patient. How do you sort of parse that out and not have to feel like you've got to get it all out right away and get everything out on the playing field, but let them come to it. And again, getting back to that art of asking questions at the right time and allowing them to just kind of flow. So I'm sorry, I just went off on a tangent there.
No, I agree completely. I think I totally agree with that. Yeah. And it is an art, and it takes time, and it takes great mentors. And so, how do you build mentorship into your school? We have mentor teachers. We have 3 mentor teachers at our school who also work with our newer teachers to share their experiences about what for some of them, they call it a tumultuous journey of really shifting how they teach, even in preschool. One of our teachers used to be a high school biology teacher, and she said, this is, I would love to go back and teach biology now because I would do it completely different. So we use a lot of mentoring and a lot of various supports around our school. So.
Okay, well, Jill, I really appreciate your time and the thinking. As we wrap up here, or before we wrap up here, is there anything that you would like to sort of give as a parting shot or talk about? Any tips or tricks or pitfalls, things to avoid?
I think it takes 3 years to really feel confident in what you're doing, and so being patient with yourself, and then don't forget to explain to the kids the process that they're going through. I think we forget to honor that it's really about their journey and their learning, and if we don't explain to them that there's a shift in the way they're doing things, then we don't give them the opportunity to understand why they're doing it. So I think that that's really important, to honor and invite them into the learning process as much as possible.
Well, fantastic. Again, thank you so much for your time. The name of the school is Spanish House in Dallas, Texas. Jill Ackers. And I thank you again so much, and we'll talk to you next time.